Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, a former three-time MLB All Star and a current analyst at the MLB Network, Dan Plesac. Dan, welcome to the show.
Chase, you're making me feel really important. I don't know if I am or not, but I tell you what, I was exhausted yesterday. The trade deadline day was yesterday. And man, I was on the air for 3 hours yesterday. There was so much going on in baseball yesterday. I'm kind of catching my breath right now, but I'm ready to go.
Absolutely. Yes, we are going to get into the trade deadline. But, what I just mentioned, you are a three-time All-Star, which, not many MLB players can say that. And it's an incredible accomplishment. However, as time has gone on, the meaning of making the All-Star team has seemed to be less important, at least in the eyes of a fan. What did it feel like to be on the All-Star team at the time? And why do you feel the meaning of it has sort of diminished over time?
Okay, Chase, I think the reason that it has diminished is there's just so many more platforms that you can watch baseball on now, right? So in the 80s and 90s, there was a game of the week that was on NBC. If you could watch a Yankee game on the local network, you could watch that. Or if you're fortunate enough to live in Atlanta or Chicago, to have TBS to watch the Braves or WGN to watch the Cubs. But there just wasn't as much baseball. Now, with your cell phone, with your iPad, with your computer, you can watch every game every night somehow, some way. And so I think the importance of the All-Star game, and now with interleague play too, it's like the Mets and Yankees play together. Well, before interleague play, the American League and the National League, the only time they saw each other was at the All-Star game or at the World Series. So it was really cool. Like my first All-Star game, I was with Milwaukee. The Brewers then were in the American League East. So that was the first time I got a chance to see Darryl Strawberry, Gary Carter, Andre Dawson, all of the good players, the great players, Mike Schmidt, Jack Clark, all the great players in the National League, Oral Hershiser. I never had a chance to see those players, but now the baseball is consumed in so many ways right now, Chase, that like it's not that special anymore because you have access to so many games now to watch.
Right, absolutely. I think in everything in this world, the advancements of technology and streaming and everything has really just affected the world as a whole. But now we mentioned you've been a player and now you are a very successful broadcaster. And, a lot of times when announcers are talking to players, sometimes there's not a great, connection or relationship there if the announcer is trying to ask a tough question or the player isn't really given much, for an answer. Now kind of being on both sides, how do you have more appreciation, from an announcer standpoint, from also from a player standpoint?
Okay, Chase, when you're playing, there's a couple of things that scare you. A microphone in your face and a TV camera, because as a player, you really have a hard time trusting the media because, there can be bad stories written about you, especially when you're playing in markets like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles. There's a lot of good stories, but there's also a lot of stories that are negative stories about a team, about a player, about a guy's work habits. And so I think as a player, I know I was always really hesitant to become like friends with somebody in the media because you just never know what that will come back and bite you in the long run.
Right.
Now, since I've been done playing, I've had a little different perspective, but the way I look at it is the same. Now, if I came in on a Friday night and I agreed to do this podcast with you, and I gave up 4 hits and 4 runs, and we were going to do the podcast on Saturday morning, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to get a guy in a very good mood, and you're going to have to ask me some tough questions like, hey, what happened last night? You hadn't blown a save in a month. Last night, 4 hits, inning in a third, 5 runs, all earned, blew a save, took the loss, and it's a negative interview. And I think you're hypersensitive. While you're playing, you always are afraid like that there's always an angle that somebody's trying to get you. But I will say this. I learned the hard way through experience. When you play in markets like New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, LA, you're better off being brutally honest. If you're asked a question, what happened last night? I wasn't good enough last night. I stunk. But when you try to sugarcoat it or make excuses for it, that's when it becomes bad. And that's when then you're just kind of adding fuel to the fire. I think the key in the big markets, accept when you're bad. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I stunk. I have to be better. It was unacceptable and I've got to be better. I felt bad. But if you come up with excuses like I didn't like the mound, the balls were slippery, people don't buy that. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. And I think as a player, when you're in it, you don't trust the media. But then when I get out of it, I'm on the other side of it now. And I just feel like it's a little different for me, Chase, at the national level, because If I go to Port St. Lucie to go to Mets camp, or I go to Steinbrenner Field in Tampa, and we do 30 teams in 30 days on the Yankees, you're getting guys' best behavior because you're not the local TV channel, right? Because they know they're watching MLB Network, they're watching MLB Tonight. And, so you get a little bit better access and you get a little better, more interviews. You get better interviews with guys because I'm on the national level.
Well, you just mentioned you're on the national level, and that leads to bigger interviews. That probably also leads to, some more information that you could find out. And from kind of what you were hearing around some of the interviews and some of the information that you were getting, you mentioned the trade deadline wrapped up yesterday. Was there a player that was seriously considered, getting moved, or that was really on the trade block that actually stuck with their team?
Yeah, well, I think Garrett Crochet, a left-handed starting pitcher for the White Sox, he came out about 2 days before the trading deadline and came up with these demands. If he's going to be traded, he wants a contract extension to pitch in the month of October. He doesn't want to go to the bullpen. And I know for a fact there were several teams that were really interested in Garrett Crochet. The Phillies were one, the Dodgers for sure were the other. But I think the Phillies looked at him more like they like their starting pitching. They like Zach Wheeler. They like Aaron Nola. They like what they have. And so I think they looked at him as more of a weapon in the bullpen. And he didn't want to be a bullpen pitcher anymore. He had been through some injuries. And I think that was the one guy that the trade deadline, when he came out and made some demands, that one, he didn't want to pitch in the bullpen. And two, if he was going to pitch in October, he wanted a contract before that. He really tied the White Sox hands. They weren't able to move him. And I do know this, Chase, there were a lot of teams that were in on him 48 hours before the trade deadline ended, but at the end, nobody really wanted to take on that challenge.
Right. I had a feeling Crochet would be one of those answers, but even some other big pitchers, Tarek Skubal didn't end up going. I know he was somewhat rumored, but yeah, he ended up staying in Detroit. Blake Snell ended up staying where he was. So honestly, I think, and maybe I kind of want to touch with you on this. I feel like this year more than any other, so many teams needed starting pitching or at least pitching out of the bullpen. And I think when you look at a guy like Trevor Rogers, my Orioles made this trade. You have to give up 2 of your top prospects, 2 of your top young players to get maybe a project at pitcher. Why do you feel the pitching value was so high this year? Why were so many teams demanded of that pitching?
Supply and demand. Good pitchers were at a premium, and there were a lot of teams looking for good pitchers, right? There were a lot of guys in on Rogers. There were a lot of teams in on Tanner Scott. There were several teams that were in on Jack Flaherty. The problem is this: to make a trade, you have to have a match, right? So there was speculation that the Orioles, before the trade deadline, Mason Miller broke his finger, a little fracture in his finger with the A's. And the Orioles were linked to Mason Miller, right? And that would have brought back a huge haul. The problem is not a lot of teams have the inventory of young players like the Orioles do. Now, I'm sure that the Orioles could have been on Skubal, but it would have cost them Jackson Holliday, I would imagine, who today, by the way, hit a grand slam, got called back up to the big leagues. And a lot of people know that the Orioles won. They are stacked in the minor leagues. They're stacked in double and triple A. That was the one team at the trade deadline. If they were really desperate to get Skubal, if they were really desperate to get Blake Snell, they were the only team really that had the inventory of pitchers and players that teams were looking back for in return. Listen, the Dodgers, they want the pitcher. They're okay with giving a prospect. But the Orioles are still in that building mode, and I think they covet the young players that they have. So premium, if you were a good pitcher and you were healthy and you looked like you could get people out, there were a lot of teams overpaid for some pitching, but it was really in demand this year.
Right. But what else kind of stood out from the trade deadline? Maybe outside of the pitching, what else stood out besides, again, the pitching at a high demand? Anything else?
Chase, I'm surprised that the Padres went all in again. This is like the third year trade deadline winter meetings. Man, they are super aggressive. As a matter of fact, I watched the game last night, Padres-Dodgers. They set a new record for a crowd at Petco last night, like 47,000 plus last night. The biggest crowd. They had over 30 sellouts this year. They're spending like the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Mets, and the Padres, and I would say they're a mid-market team, but they've been in on everybody. And basically, they gave up a lot to get Tanner Scott, who was everybody. That was the guy the Orioles were in on. I think the Phillies were in on him. There were like 5 or 6 teams that were in on Tanner Scott. And just what happened is the Padres, they had a better collection that they were willing to give up, and that's how they were able to get him.
Yeah, I mean Tanner Scott actually. It's funny you say he was linked to the Orioles, a former Oriole, but I mean he's had
Right.
a terrific year with Miami this year. Yeah, you're 100% right, and it is interesting to see again a team like San Diego, especially with Manny Machado not being at his full level anymore, that they did buy in. You're right. Now I think it's sports overall. We're seeing a ton of teams. Or seeing a ton of leagues, excuse me, add more postseason teams, probably for the revenue and just to get more teams to really have a shot. If the MLB starts to do the same and they continue to add, more teams into the postseason picture, what will that mean for the trade deadline? Will more teams want to, you think buy or just not sell in
Yeah,
general?
I'll tell you what. If you look at this standings right now, Chase, and let's just say there wasn't a wild card, you went back to the old style. The Dodgers are a runaway. The Phillies are a runaway, right? The Guardians are a runaway. There would be like two divisions in baseball right now. The AL East would be compelling because it would be the Yankees and the Baltimore Orioles, but then there's a gap, to the Rays. There's a gap to the Toronto Blue Jays. Listen, I was one like I'm from that old school. I broke in 1986, and I was all in on the wild card. And then when they added another team, Chase, it was the best thing that baseball has ever done because
Yeah.
the big part is now the NFL camps are going to be opening soon, and a lot of people in this Northeast corridor. It's going to be Jets, it's going to be Giants, it's going to be Eagles, and baseball can get on that back burner really easy. Not so much in the Northeast here with college football; it's more bigger in the Midwest than in the South. But you start getting into September, and there's only one or two races that are compelling, and all of a sudden you see attendance down. And I just think right now it has made the Twins viable. It's made the Rangers viable. It's made the Kansas City Royals viable. Listen, there were like 12 of the 30 teams that were at the trade deadline that were definitely trying to improve. I think it's a good thing for baseball. I didn't understand it. I didn't really like it at the beginning, but under Bud Selig's term as being commissioner, I think that was one of the best things that Major League Baseball did, expanding and going to the wild card.
Interesting, because I know again maybe a lot of old fashioned or I guess like older players may have felt differently, but it's interesting to kind of see you have that perspective now as an announcer. Are there any teams right now you're looking at that are kind of dark horses? Do you think can make that leap to be a World Series contender this year?
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you two teams, and I don't know if either one are going to get into the postseason. I'm really intrigued by the Kansas City Royals. They made some minor improvements at the trade deadline. Seth Lugo has been a tremendous free agent signing. They've got another young guy, Cole Reagans and Brady Singer, two young pitchers. They're a dangerous team. Not enough people know about Bobby Witt Jr., their shortstop. He's one of the top five players in all of baseball. He gets lost in the shuffle with Otani and Judge and Mookie Betts. Bobby Witt Jr. is a terrific player. And on the National League side, I don't know if anybody wants to get into a short series. Don't laugh. The Pittsburgh Pirates. Paul Skeens right now might be the best starting pitcher in Major League Baseball. He's probably a slam dunk to win NL Rookie of the Year. They have another guy, Jones, that is really good, and Mitch Keller. They have three really good young pitchers. Now, I don't know if they can get there, but I do know this, Chase. Nobody in the NL would want to take a chance in playing the Pirates because they run three really good starting pitchers. The problem with the Pirates, Chase, they just can't hit. They're a very bad offensive team. They tried to add at the trading deadline, and they just weren't able, in my opinion, to acquire enough to take them serious. But those two teams are my dark horse teams.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm 100% there with the Kansas City Royals. Bobby Witt is incredible. What is he
Oh,
doing now? Like 345 or something? I mean,
he's
it's
incredible.
ridiculous. He really is.
He's a blend of Robin Yount, Paul Molitor, Cal Ripken Jr. He can run. He can hit for power. He's a good defender. He can steal bases. He's a terrific player.
Yeah, Bobby Witt's amazing. And then you mentioned the Pirates. I don't know if there's anybody in baseball right now, or at least baseball fans, that doesn't like Paul Skeens and what he's doing with Pittsburgh. Kind of on the flip side here, you could say one from the American League and National League if you like. Who's a team right now that everyone's high on that you think may, plummish a little bit the second half of the year?
I know you don't want to hear this. I'm a little bit concerned about the Orioles starting pitching. The Yankees are getting hot again. They're starting to swing the bats. And I thought Jazz Chisholm has been a huge addition. He's hit 4 home runs in his first 3 games. They're starting to hit the ball again. I'm a little scared about the Orioles starting pitching. I think it's a big drop-off. Corbin Burns, I like the Zach Eflin move. I think that's a good one. Grayson Rodriguez, to me, I really want to wrap my arms around him and like him, Chase, but just when he has a couple of good starts, you feel really good about it. He has one of those starts where they score a couple of runs early and he gives it back, and he there's just a little bit too much of 5 1/3, and he's out of a game. The pitch count gets up. I'm a little worried about their starting pitching. So that team scares me, I guess, from a perspective of if they were able to go get a Tarek Skubal, a Blake Snell, a difference maker, number 2 behind Corbin Burns, I would be all in on the Orioles. So the starting pitching scares me a little bit with the Orioles. National League, and you're going to be a little bit surprised. There's some concern with the Dodgers. I don't know if their pitching is as good. Now, Glasnow was really good last night. He went 7 innings, gave up 3 runs. He threw the ball really well. You don't know what's going to happen with Clayton Kershaw. Walker Buehler's still down at the minor league complex. They've had a lot of injuries. They're another team. You've got the top end of that thing, Yamamoto. They don't know when he's going to come back. I don't know if the pitching, Jack Flaherty, listen, he was acquired last year by the Orioles at the trade deadline, and he wasn't very good for the Orioles last year. So just assuming that he's going to put a Dodgers uniform on and be able to become a really good pitcher. So I think 2 good teams that I would tread lightly on are the Orioles and the Dodgers in the National League.
You know, it's funny. Those are the 2 1 seeds in the American League and National League last year. But
Yes.
I mean, the Dodgers. I mean, you could say what you want to say about that 2020, championship run. Actually, you can touch on this if you want. I mean, to me, I think the Dodgers just haven't come up in the playoffs. I think it's hard to judge any team out of a 60-game MLB season. I mean, to me, that was too short of a sample size.
It was. And, there are a lot of people that say, that was the World Series. All the games were in Arlington. No fans in the ballpark. It was a little bit different environment. I get all that. I will say this. Mookie Betts was a one-man wrecking crew with a bat, with his glove, with his arm in right field. He was a difference maker. Blake Snell looked like he had them handcuffed and shut down. As soon as he came out of the game, the Dodgers took advantage of it. The Dodgers have had a bullseye on their back for the last 4 or 5 years. And I know Dave Roberts gets a lot of criticism. They're going to win the West again. I know the Padres are closing in. I think they're 6.5 games behind the Dodgers, but I don't think they're going to catch the Dodgers. Freddie Freeman should be back sometime soon. They're going to get Mookie Betts back. They're going to win the West, but then again, there's a lot of pressure on the Dodgers. It's kind of World Series or bust, and they're by no means a slam dunk to get to the World Series. In my opinion, I think the Philadelphia Phillies are the best constructed team in all of baseball, and I
don't disagree.
I think they're by far the best team in Major League Baseball. And I love the acquisition. They acquired Estes, the guy, the closer from the Angels. That's going to settle that 9th inning down. Like the lineup. Love the starting pitching. The bullpen's better. The Phillies are loaded.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like last year with the Texas Rangers, what we saw.
Yes.
I mean, in the National League All Star team, it was literally all Philadelphia, all the guys who were starting. So, I mean, again, we talked about the All Star game earlier, but yes, Philadelphia is great. Look, Dan, we've been talking about all these teams all day. You're one of the biggest analysts in Major League Baseball. Tell me, who's winning the AL, who's winning the NL, and then who's winning the World Series?
Okay, I'm going to go. I'm really liking the Philadelphia Phillies. I think the Phillies are going to be the representative for the National League in the World Series. I'm bouncing between the Yankees and the Orioles. If I knew Grayson Rodriguez would step up and be a difference maker, it would lean me more towards the Orioles than the Yankees. With that said, I'm going to go with the Orioles by the slightest of margin. It's going to be a 90-mile World Series. I think Phillies and Orioles. And I just think this time the Phillies, if they get there, disappointment last year, the Diamondbacks punched them in the face in Game 6 and Game 7 in the League Championship Series at the bank. The Phillies are hungry. I see a 7-game series. Phillies over the Orioles in the World Series.
You know what? That's what I am an Orioles fan, but that's what I see too. I think we could get out of the American League, but I think you're 100% right. The Philadelphia Phillies are amazing. There would be so many storylines there. The last time the Orioles won a World Series was 1983 against Philadelphia. Craig Kimbrell and Sir Anthony Dominguez in the bullpen if they blow it in that series against Philadelphia. Austin Hayes now on Philadelphia compared to Baltimore. The storylines would be endless. Dan, this has been great, but I ask this to every single person that I do interview. If you had to give one piece of advice to an aspiring sports broadcaster listening to this right now, wanting to get where you are in your career, what would it be and why?
Love what you do. Don't take no for an answer. It's not an easy way. Sometimes it's going to take you a while to get a break or an opportunity. And if you really love it, you'll pay the price. You'll be patient, work hard, do your own homework. Don't take anybody else. If you're going to interview a player, get as much information as you can about that player. The last thing you want to do is say you get an interview with Corbin Burns. You sit down, you talk to Corbin Burns. You don't know if he's right-handed or left-handed. You don't know if he's a starter or reliever. And immediately, if you ask a dumb question, the player knows that you're not prepared. All of a sudden, he's going to shut you off. Be prepared. Don't take no for an answer, and keep grinding. It's a grind, but it's worth it if you can make it.
Dan Plesac, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking baseball with us. We really do appreciate it. And we're looking forward to continuing to watch you on the MLB Network, continuing to follow all of your work. Again, one more time, Dan Plesac, thank you so much.
Chase, and if you want to do this again, postseason edition, you have my number. You call me, we'll get that done.
Absolutely. I would love it. This is awesome. Dan, again, thank you so much. The audience, I hope you guys did enjoy this episode. If you did, please subscribe, follow, share, and view alongside Dan Plesac. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and we will see you next time right here from the Cool Sports Network.